The road had stopped pretending it went anywhere. It narrowed into a cracked ribbon of dirt that cut through fields long since given up on by rain and mercy alike. The sun hung low, swollen and red, like it had been watching too much and grown tired of caring. Every step along that road felt borrowed strength, borrowed breath, borrowed hope. Elias Hale counted his steps because it was the only way not to think. 73, 74, 75. Behind him, his mother stumbled. He felt it before he heard it. The tug on his sleeve, light as a leaf falling but heavy as a lifetime. "Eli," she whispered. He turned so fast the world tilted. His mother, Ruth Hale, stood bent at the waist, one hand clutching her side, the other braced on her knees. Her hair, once thick and black, clung to her temples in damp silver strands. Her dress, patched so many times it barely remembered what it was, fluttered weakly in the hot wind. "I'm fine," she said, because mothers always did. Her voice betrayed her immediately. Elias was 13, but his eyes had learned things no child should. He saw the grayness under her skin, the way her lips had lost their color days ago. He saw how every breath cost her something. "You said that an hour ago," he replied quietly. She tried to straighten, failed, smiled anyway. Then it must still be true. He swallowed hard. Around them, nothing moved. No birds, no wagons, no distant church bells. Just fields, fences leaning like tired old men, and a barn in the distance, big, dark, and standing alone against the sky. Elias looked at it like it was a promise. "Just sit for a minute," he said. "Please." Ruth shook her head. "If I sit, I won't get back up." That scared him more than anything she could have said. He scanned the horizon again. The farmhouse beside the barn looked lived in. Smoke curling from a chimney, a truck parked crookedly near the porch. Someone was home, someone with walls, water, shade, someone who could say no. They had heard that word enough times to recognize its weight before it was spoken. Elias took a breath, squared his shoulders, and made a decision that felt older than he was. "Wait here," he said. Her eyes widened. "Eli, I'll be right back." He didn't wait for permission. He ran. Dust kicked up behind him as his boots slapped the earth. Every step toward the barn made his chest tighten. Not from the run, but from the memory of other doors, other porches, other faces that hardened the moment they saw the shape of need approaching. He slowed as he reached the yard. The barn loomed tall, its red paint peeling like scab skin. The big doors were half open, shadows pooling inside. The farmhouse porch creaked under his weight. He wiped his palms on his pants and knocked. Once. Nothing. He knocked again, louder this time. Footsteps approached. Heavy. Measured. The door opened just enough for a man's face to appear. Late 40s, maybe. Sunburned skin, eyes sharp and assessing. He wore a work shirt rolled at the sleeves, arms thick with muscle hardened by labor, not kindness. "Yes?" the man said, already irritated. Elias swallowed. He had practiced words in his head for miles, but they scattered now like frightened birds. "My name's Elias," he began. "Sir." The man's eyes flicked past him, scanning the road. "We don't hire," he said flatly. "I'm not asking for work," Elias said quickly. Then, because honesty had been beaten into him by necessity, he added, "Not exactly." The man sighed. "Boy, I don't." "If I sweep your barn," Elias blurted, voice cracking just enough to betray him, "would you let us sleep there tonight, sir?" The words fell heavy between them. The man stared. "My mama's too weak to walk another mile," Elias added, softer now. "Just for the night. We won't be in the way." Silence stretched. From the yard, a voice called out, "Who is it, Thomas?" A woman appeared behind the man, her face lined but kind, eyes immediately drawn past Elias to the road beyond. Thomas didn't answer her. He studied Elias instead, really studied him, the dirt-caked boots, the hollow cheeks, the way the boy stood too straight, like he learned early that weakness invited cruelty. "We've had trouble," Thomas said finally. "People steal. People lie." Elias nodded. "We don't." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to take your word?" "No, sir. Elias replied. Just give me a broom. The woman stepped closer. Thomas, she said quietly. He didn't look at her. How old are you? He asked. 13. And your father? Elias's jaw tightened. Gone. Thomas exhaled through his nose. He opened the door wider. Barn's a mess, he said. Hay everywhere. Stalls need mucking. I'll do it, Elias said instantly. All of it? Yes, sir. And you don't step foot in the house. Elias nodded again, relief flooding him so fast it nearly knocked him over. You leave at first light, Thomas added. Yes, sir. Thomas turned away. Get to it. The barn was hotter than the road, the air thick with dust and old straw. Elias grabbed the broom and started without pause. He swept until his arms burned, until blisters formed and burst, until sweat soaked through his shirt and stung his eyes. He worked like someone racing time. Outside, he saw his mother slowly make her way toward the barn, leaning on a fence post when her legs trembled. The woman from the house followed her, offering a cup of water. Elias kept sweeping. He swept because stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant fear. As the sun dipped lower, Thomas returned, watching silently from the doorway. He said nothing when Elias dragged out piles of waste. Nothing when he scrubbed the troughs with water hauled bucket by bucket. Nothing when night crept in and the boys still hadn't slowed. Finally, Thomas spoke. That'll do. Elias froze, broom midair. You can stop, Thomas said. You've earned the floor. Elias nodded, too exhausted to speak. He rushed to his mother's side, helping her settle onto a clean patch of hay in the far stall. She smiled at him, pride and sorrow tangled together. You did good, she whispered. He nodded, throat tight. Outside, voices carried from the farmhouse. Thomas and the woman, arguing in low tones Elias couldn't quite make out. He caught fragments. Not our problem. He's just a child. World hard. Elias lay awake long after the barn went quiet, staring at the wooden beams overhead. For the first time in days, they weren't walking. For the first time, his mother was resting without pain carved into every breath. But something gnawed at him, the way Thomas had looked at him. Not cruel, not kind, calculating. Footsteps approached the barn door again. The hinges creaked open. Light spilled across the floor. Thomas stood there, silhouette sharp against the night. Boy, he said. Elias sat up instantly. Yes, sir. Thomas's eyes flicked the roof, asleep and pale in the hay. Then back to Elias. We need to talk, he said. Now. And the way he said it told Elias one thing with chilling clarity. This night wasn't done with them yet. Thomas didn't wait for Elias to answer. He turned and walked deeper into the barn, boots crunching against straw, forcing the boy to follow. Elias glanced back once at his mother, her chest rising shallow and uneven, before standing and trailing after the man. Every step felt like stepping onto thin ice. He had learned that when adults said we need to talk, it usually meant something was about to be taken away. They stopped near the center stall, where moonlight slipped through the slats like pale fingers. Thomas crossed his arms. Up close, Elias could see the lines carved into the man's face, not just by sun and years, but by decisions that hadn't come easy, the kind that hardened a person whether they wanted it or not. You didn't lie, Thomas said finally. Elias blinked. Sir, the work. You did it right. Didn't cut corners. Elias nodded slowly. I said I would. Thomas looked past him, toward the dark outline of the fields. Most people who come asking for help don't. Elias didn't answer. He had learned silence was safer than defense. Thomas exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. My wife thinks we should let you stay longer. Elias's heart jumped, then immediately sank. There it is, he thought, the part where hope gets its legs cut out. And you don't, Elias said quietly. Thomas met his eyes. This farm barely keeps us afloat as it is. One bad season away from losing everything. You stay, word gets around. Then others come. Hungry people don't stop coming. Elias felt his chest tighten. We won't tell anyone. That's what they all say. My mama can't make it tomorrow, Elias said before he could stop himself. The words rushed out, unguarded. She's been coughing blood. I think she's sick, not just tired. Thomas stiffened. I don't want food, Elias added quickly. Or money. Just one more night. I'll work. I'll do anything. Silence pressing again. From outside the barn, a truck engine growled in the distance. Headlights swept briefly across the fields, then disappeared down the road. Thomas's jaw tightened. That's Sheriff Calder. Elias felt the name before he understood it. Fear had its own language. He comes by sometimes, Thomas continued. Checks papers. Asks questions. We didn't do anything, Elias said. Thomas gave a humorless smile. That doesn't always matter. He turned toward the farmhouse, then paused. Stay quiet, both of you. Before Elias could ask what that meant, Thomas walked away. The barn door closed. The night grew louder in its absence. Elias returned to his mother, sitting beside her on the hay. Her eyes fluttered open. Everything okay? She whispered. He forced a smile. Just more work talk. She reached for his hand, her fingers cold. Eli, listen to me. Yes, Mama. If anything happens, you don't argue. You don't fight. You survive. He swallowed. Nothing's happening. But his body knew better. Minutes later, headlights flooded the yard. A truck door slammed. Heavy footsteps crossed gravel with authority. A knock on the farmhouse door. Sharp. Official. Elias held his breath. Voices drifted through the night. Thomas's low and controlled. Another deeper, edged with suspicion. Sheriff Calder. You got travelers on your property, the sheriff said. Thomas didn't deny it. A boy and his mother. Passing through. That's so, Calder replied. County's been clear. No vagrants. Not after what happened in Miller's Grove. Elias felt his mother tense beside him. They're not trouble, Thomas said. That's what Miller said too, Calder answered. Until his barn was cleaned out and his chickens gone. We haven't stolen anything, Elias whispered, though no one could hear him. Footsteps approached the barn again. The door swung open. Sheriff Calder filled the doorway like a bad omen. Tall, thick-necked, badge gleaming in the harsh beam of his flashlight. His eyes swept the interior, landing first on Ruth, then on Elias. Well, I'll be damned, Calder said. Kid's got himself a work ethic. Elias stood, placing himself between the sheriff and his mother, without thinking. She's sick, Elias said. We're leaving tomorrow. Calder raised an eyebrow. You got papers? Elias froze. Thomas stepped in. They're just resting. I gave permission. Calder turned slowly. Didn't know you were running a shelter now, Thomas. I'm not. Then you know the rules. Calder took a step forward. Elias didn't move. Boy, Calder said, voice dropping. I asked you a question. Elias's hands curled into fists. No, sir. Calder smiled, and it wasn't kind. Figures. He turned his flashlight on Ruth. She coughed weakly, a thin, wet sound that echoed too loud in the barn. Looks contagious, Calder said. County hospital's full. You know what that means. Thomas's jaw clenched. She won't survive the road. Calder shrugged. Not my concern. Elias felt something break open inside him, not loudly, but completely. I'll work, he said again, louder this time. For you, for the county. I'll clean roads, ditches, anything. Just let her rest. Calder studied him, amusement flickering across his face. You're begging. Elias didn't deny it. That kind of desperation usually means guilt, Calder said. Thomas snapped. That's enough. Calder turned sharply. Careful, Thomas. The air felt like it might crack. Then the farmhouse door opened behind them. Thomas's wife stepped into the light. She can barely breathe, she said, her voice steady but fierce. If you take her, she'll die. Calder sighed. Ma'am, you don't tell me my job. No, she replied, but I'll tell you this. If you drag that woman out of here tonight, you'll do it in front of God and everyone who hears about it tomorrow. Calder's eyes narrowed. Thomas added quietly, You want trouble, or do you want quiet? The sheriff considered this. Finally, he lowered the flashlight. "One night," Calder said. "At first light, they're gone. And if I hear so much of a rumor—" "They'll be gone," Thomas said. Calder stepped back, muttering. "People like this bring nothing but ruin." The truck engine roared back to life. Headlights faded. The barn fell silent again. Elias sank to his knees, shaking. His mother pulled him close, kissing his hair. "You're brave," she whispered. He didn't feel brave. He felt small and tired and terrified of morning. Thomas lingered at the door. "Boy," he said. Elias looked up. "Tomorrow," Thomas continued, "things won't be as simple as walking away." Elias's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" he asked. Thomas hesitated, then spoke the words that changed everything. "Sheriff Calder isn't done with you, and neither is this town." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the barn walls like a warning. Elias held his mother tighter, knowing deep in his bones. Morning was going to demand a price neither of them were ready to pay. Morning came without mercy. The light crept through the barn slats like an intruder, pale and cold, landing first on Elias's face. He had not slept. Every time his eyes closed, he saw Sheriff Calder's smile, thin, knowing, patient. The kind of smile that waited for mistakes. His mother stirred beside him for one fragile second. Elias hoped she might sit up strong, that yesterday's weakness had been a trick of exhaustion. But when she tried to rise, pain folded her back down again, a sharp breath tearing from her chest. "Easy," Elias whispered, helping her lean against the stall wall. She nodded, ashamed of her body's betrayal. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she said quietly. "I do," Elias replied, though he wasn't sure how. "You're tired because you've been strong too long." She smiled at that, but it didn't reach her eyes. Outside, the farm was already awake. Metal clanged. A rooster cried hoarse and angry. The ordinary sounds of life continuing, indifferent to suffering. Thomas entered the barn with a cup of water and a small cloth. He knelt without a word and pressed the cloth to Ruth's forehead. "You're burning up," he said. "I'll be all right," Ruth replied automatically. Thomas looked at Elias instead. "I lied to the sheriff." Elias stiffened. "Sir, there's no bus coming through this road. Not today. Not tomorrow." He hesitated. If Calder realizes that, Elias felt the weight of it crash into him. "Then we can't leave." "No," Thomas said. "You can't." Silence settled heavy and suffocating. Thomas stood, rubbing his hands together like a man trying to wash off guilt. "I'll bring food," he said. "But after that, I don't know." He left before Elias could thank him. Ruth watched him go. "That man is afraid," she murmured. "So am I," Elias admitted. She reached for his hand. "Fear doesn't mean stop. It means choose carefully." The barn door creaked again, not Thomas this time. A younger man stepped inside. Early 20s. Clean shirt. Too clean. His eyes moved quickly, taking in everything, lingering on Ruth with thinly veiled disgust. "Who are you?" Elias asked, standing. The man smirked. "Name's Grant Calder." The last name hit like a blow. "Sheriff's son," Grant added, enjoying the reaction. "Dad asked me to check something." "There's nothing to check," Elias said. Grant circled the stall slowly. "Funny. Dad says people like you always say that." Ruth coughed, hard this time, crimson blooming against her hand. Elias rushed to her side, panic flaring. Grant stopped walking. Well, he said. "That looks serious." "She needs rest," Elias said. "Please." Grant crouched, bringing his face level with Elias's. "You know what happens when someone dies on private property." Elias shook his head. "Owner gets blamed," Grant said softly. "Investigated. Fined. Sometimes worse." Elias's throat tightened. "We didn't ask to be sick." Grant stood. "No, but you are." Footsteps approached outside. Thomas's wife, carrying bread and a small bowl of stew. She froze when she saw Grant. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Grant smiled politely. "Just visiting." "Get out," she replied, voice shaking with controlled fury. Grant's smile slipped. Careful, ma'am. I said get out. Grant glanced at Ruth one last time. Dad will be back, he said to Elias. By noon. He left. The barn felt smaller after that, like the walls had moved in. Elias pressed his forehead to his mother's arm, breathing in a faint smell of dust and sweat and home. I don't know what to do, he whispered. Ruth's voice came weak but steady. Yes, you do. He looked up. You always do. The morning dragged on. Ruth worsened. Her breathing grew ragged. Each inhale a struggle. Thomas returned twice, his face darker each time. They're talking, he said on the third visit. In town. Sheriff says you're dangerous. Elias laughed sharp and hollow. For sweeping? For existing, Thomas replied. A truck rumbled into the yard again. Elias knew the sound now. Sheriff Calder stepped out, Grant beside him. Two other men followed, deputies, hands resting near their belts. This is done, Calder said loudly, not bothering with the barn door this time. Thomas stepped forward. She won't survive the road. Calder shrugged. That's a shame. Elias moved in front of his mother. If you take her, he said, voice trembling but loud, you'll have to go through me. Grant laughed. Hear that, Dad? Hero talk. Calder studied Elias carefully. You're a brave boy, he said. Stupid, but brave. Ruth reached out, pulling Elias back. Eli, she whispered. Listen to me. No, he said. I won't let them. She cupped his face with shaking hands. You already did enough. Calder nodded to the deputies. Get them up. Thomas's wife screamed. Stop. The deputies stepped forward. And then, a shout from the road. Wait. Everyone turned. A dusty sedan skidded to a stop at the edge of the property. A man climbed out, holding papers high in the air. I have proof, he yelled, and you're going to want to see it. Sheriff Calder's face hardened. Elias's heart pounded, because somehow impossibly, hope had just slammed on the brakes. And whatever those papers were, Elias knew one thing for certain. They were about to set something on fire that this town had buried for years. The man with the papers didn't look like a hero. He was thin, shoulders slumped, shirt wrinkled as if sleep had forgotten him. One shoe was darker than the other, soaked with oil or water or something he hadn't had time to clean. His hair was streaked with gray despite a face that suggested he hadn't earned it yet. But he stood in the road like someone who had already crossed a line and burned the map behind him. Sheriff Calder recovered first. And who are you supposed to be? He asked, voice sharp enough to cut. The man swallowed, but he didn't lower the papers. Name Samuel Price. I used to work records for the county. Grant scoffed. Used to? Samuel flinched at that, then steadied himself. I was fired 3 months ago. For incompetence, Calder snapped. No, Samuel said. For asking questions. The deputies shifted uneasily. Thomas felt it too, the shift in air. The way certainty began to wobble when truth decided to speak without permission. Samuel took a step closer. I found discrepancies. Property seizures. Medical transfers. Death certificates signed before bodies ever arrived. Calder's jaw clenched. You're trespassing. Samuel ignored him. Miller's Grove wasn't robbed, he said, louder now. Those families weren't vagrants. They were removed. Grant laughed, too loud. You're unhinged. Samuel's eyes burned. I have copies, names, dates, and I have witnesses who disappeared right after. Elias stood frozen, heart hammering. He didn't fully understand the words, but he understood the fear behind them. Calder stepped forward, put the papers down. Samuel shook his head. You don't get to decide that anymore. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Ruth coughed. It was a wet, tearing sound that cut through the standoff like a blade. Samuel's gaze snapped to her, horror flashing across his face. Oh, God, he whispered. She's one of them. Calder turned sharply. Enough. She fits the pattern, Samuel insisted. Weak, sick, no papers. You move them off property. Say they wandered on, then... Calder lunged. Thomas reacted without thinking. He stepped between them. "Don't," Thomas warned. Calder stopped inches from him, eyes cold. "Get out of my way." "You touch him," Thomas said, voice shaking with something dangerous, "and you'll answer for it." Grant stepped forward. "Dad." "No," Calder snapped. "This ends now." He turned to the deputies. "Arrest him." The deputies hesitated. Samuel's voice rose. "Ask yourselves why I was fired. Ask yourselves why no one ever comes back." One deputy, young, barely older than Grant, shifted his weight. "Sir, maybe we should." Calder's glare shut him up. Elias felt the moment stretch thin, like glass about to shatter. Then Ruth spoke. Her voice was weak, but it carried. "He's telling the truth." Every head turned. Ruth pushed herself upright, Elias helping her. Her face was pale, sweat beading at her hairline, but her eyes were clear. "I've seen this before," she said. "Different towns. Same rules. Same men." Calder sneered. "You expect anyone to believe you?" She nodded slowly. "I don't expect belief. I expect conscience." Grant laughed again. "She's delirious." Ruth looked at him. "So was your mother," she said softly. The laughter died. Grant stiffened. "What did you say?" Ruth's breath rattled, but she held his gaze. She begged at a farm outside Red Hollow. 10 years ago. I was there." Grant's face drained to color. "That's not." "She had pneumonia," Ruth continued. "She didn't make it past dawn." Grant staggered back a step. "You're lying." Samuel stared at Ruth, awe and horror mingling. Red Hollow, those records were sealed. Calder's voice dropped to a growl. "Enough." Ruth's knees buckled. Elias caught her just in time. "She needs a doctor," Elias cried. "Now." Calder looked at her like a problem to be erased. Thomas stepped forward again. "If she dies here," he said, "everyone will know who did nothing." Calder hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Sirens wailed in the distance, not county, state. Samuel exhaled shakily. "I sent copies," he said, "last night, to the state inspector." Calder's eyes flicked to the road. Calculations raced behind them. Grant whispered, "Dad?" Calder straightened. "This is a misunderstanding." The state vehicle pulled in fast, gravel spraying. A woman stepped out, sharp suit, sharper eyes. "Sheriff Calder," she said, "we need to talk." Calder forced a smile. "Of course." She glanced past him, taking in the scene, the sick woman, the boy shielding her, the trembling witnesses. "We'll talk," she said, "after an ambulance is called." Calder didn't move. "I said," she repeated, "call it." Minutes later, the sound of sirens grew closer, this time medical. Elias held his mother's hand as paramedics rushed in, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. "Stay with me," he begged. She smiled faintly. "I'm not done yet." As they wheeled her out, she caught Samuel's sleeve. "Don't let them bury this," she whispered. "I won't," he promised. Grant stood frozen, staring at the ground. Calder watched everything, face unreadable. The ambulance doors slammed shut. As it pulled away, Elias felt both relief and terror twist together, because saving her life was only the beginning. And as the state inspector turned back toward Sheriff Calder, pulling out a recorder, Elias realized something else. The truth had finally stepped into the light. But truth had enemies, and they didn't lose quietly. The town gathered the way it always did when something important happened. Slow at first, then all at once, pickups lined the road. Porch lights flicked on in daylight. People stood with arms crossed, pretending curiosity when it was fear that pulled them from their homes. Fear, and something else they hadn't felt in a long time. Hope they didn't trust. Elias sat on the steps of the farmhouse, dust still clinging to his clothes, his hands shaking now that there was nothing left to hold on to. The ambulance was gone. His mother was gone with it, taken down the same road that had nearly broken her, this time with sirens clearing the way. He didn't know if she'd live, but for the first time, she had a chance. Thomas sat beside him, silent, his wife standing behind him with a hand on his shoulder. Across the yard, Sheriff Calder stood stiff, flanked by the state inspector and two deputies who suddenly seemed unsure where their loyalties belonged. Grant Calder hadn't moved since the ambulance left. His hands trembled. The inspector clicked off her recorder. "Sheriff Calder," she said evenly, "you're relieved of duty pending investigation." Calder laughed once, sharp and humorless. "On what grounds?" "Obstruction, abuse of authority, negligence leading to death." She glanced at Samuel. "And that's just what we can prove already." Calder's smile didn't fade, but something cracked behind his eyes. "This town knows me." The inspector nodded. "They're about to know the truth." She turned to the crowd. "If anyone here has been threatened, displaced, or lost family under suspicious circumstances, now is the time to speak." No one moved. Silence pressing again, that old familiar silence that had protected cruelty for years. Elias stood. His legs felt weak, but his voice didn't. "My name is Elias Hale," he said, "and my mama almost died because no one wanted to let us rest." Heads turned. Whispers rippled. "We didn't steal," he continued. "We didn't lie. We walked until she couldn't walk anymore. And every place we went, people looked at us like we were the problem." He swallowed. If one man with a barn hadn't said yes for one night, she'd be dead. Thomas looked down, shame and resolve worn across his face. Elias took a breath. "If that makes us dangerous, then maybe the world's got something wrong." A woman stepped forward. Then another. "I lost my brother," someone said. They said he wandered off. "My aunt," another voice cracked. "She got sick, never came back." The dam broke. Stories poured out, quiet at first, then louder. Names, dates, places, every word stripping another layer from the lie that had ruled the town. Grant covered his face. Calder tried to speak, but the sound was drowned beneath the truth. Deputies moved in. Cuffs clicking shut around Calder's wrists. He didn't resist. He just stared at Elias as they led him away, not with hatred, with something closer to disbelief. The crowd slowly dispersed as dusk settled in, leaving the yard scattered with silence and aftermath. Samuel slumped onto the hood of his car, exhaustion finally claiming him. "You did it," he said softly to Elias. Elias shook his head. "My mama did." Night fell fully by the time the phone rang. Thomas answered, listened, closed his eyes. "She's stable," he said. Elias's knees gave out. Thomas caught him. "They say she fought," Thomas added. "Hard." Elias laughed and cried at the same time, burying his face into Thomas's shoulder like a child who had finally found a place to fall. Weeks passed. Sheriff Calder's arrest made state news. Investigations widened. Files were unsealed. Names were restored. Graves were marked. The town changed. Not all at once, not easily, but it changed. And so did the farm. Ruth Hale returned thinner, weaker, but alive. When she stepped out of the car, Elias ran to her, holding her like he was afraid the world might take her back if he let go. "You stayed," she whispered, looking around at the barn. "They asked us to," Elias said. Thomas stood awkwardly nearby. "There's work," he said. "If you want it. Fair work. Paid." Ruth smiled at him. "We don't take charity." Thomas nodded. "Good." Seasons turned. The barn that once held fear became a place of refuge, not a shelter, a choice. Elias grew taller, stronger. He learned crops and contracts, learned how to argue without begging. Ruth healed slowly, her cough fading into memory, her strength returning with each sunrise. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the fields, Elias stood at the fence line where the road began. Another family walked toward the farm, tired, wary, desperate. The man hesitated. "Sir," he called, "we don't have much to offer." Elias smiled, not the smile of someone who pitied, but of someone who remembered. "There's a broom in the barn," he said, "and room to rest." The man's shoulders sagged with relief. As they passed, Ruth watched from the porch, pride shining in her eyes. She had once been too weak to walk another mile. Now, her son was the reason someone else didn't have to.